Hey, and welcome back to yet another of our accounts class. And this time we're now on to the real life of double entry system. Now, remember I said with my double entry system, for every transaction we are going to have two entries. There is going to be a debit entry and there is going to be a credit entry. Now, right here on the board, I have a transaction. On January 1st, we started business with $2,000 in the bank. Okay, the 1st of January, started business with $2,000 in the bank. Now, the first thing we have to do is we have to make sure that we understand that each of these transactions have, each of these activities, they have names. And so we have to make sure to know what's the name of that account that we're going to write up. So the first one we have here was one that says started business. And whenever we see that started business, the name of the account is called capital. The money that I use to start a business is called my capital. So I am opening a capital account. And where am I putting the money? I am putting the money in the bank. And so I am opening a bank account. So I have two accounts open here for you. Started business with capital. Here goes my capital account, and I am putting $2,000 in the bank, so here goes my bank account. Now, what it is that I need to record this transaction? First of all, I have to be able to identify which side of the account is this going to go on. Is it going to go on my debit side or is it going to go on my credit side? That I am going to know because whenever my asset increases, and so I have to go back to what are my assets. Anything that is property or cash or money in the bank, that is called an asset. So let's remind ourselves of that. Assets is anything that I own, and things that the business can own are going to be like money in the bank, cash in hand, my furniture, my property, building, etc., etc. Any of these, they're called assets. Assets are things that the company own. And so the double entry system states that whenever my asset increases, it's going to go on the debit side, and whenever my asset decreases, it's going to go on the credit side. Now, capital is pretty easy because capital is money that I put in the bank, which is going to increase an asset, and so capital will always be recorded on the credit side. Now, remember, my right hand side is my credit side, my left hand side is my debit side. Now, what do I need? I need the date. So it's January 1st. And what's the detail? I put some money in the bank. And how much money did I put in the bank? $2,000. And there goes my debit entry. Now, I go to my bank account. If I put the money in the bank, it's going to increase my asset, and increase in asset is going to be a debit entry. Sorry, my capital is a credit entry. It's on the right hand side. January 1st, money in the bank, it goes on the right hand side. It's a credit. All entries in my capital account will always be credit entry because capital is money that I'm investing in the business. So I'm either going to put it in my bank or I'm going to put it in the cash till. And so money invested in the business will always increase my asset. And so it's going to be credit in my capital, debit in my asset account. So here we go. January 1st. Where did I get this money from? Capital. And that goes under my details. And how much money did we get? $2,000. So here goes my first example of what a double entry is. Okay, so we're talking about a double entry system. Two accounts, one transaction. January 1st we did something, one transaction, but it is going to affect two accounts. Every transaction affects two accounts, and there will never be two credit entry or two debit entry. It will always be one debit, one credit. Something is going to increase while something is going to decrease. So here goes, we have to now go back to what happens and how do I know what increases and what decreases, what is my assets, what are my liabilities, and what happens. But as I said before, bank, cash, anything that we own in terms of property, in terms of building, motor vehicle, these are called assets. Whenever my asset increase, it is always going to be a debit entry. And whenever my asset decrease, it is going to be a credit entry. So this was just an outline of how to set up my double entry accounts. Now let's go to the rule as to how do I know what to increase and what to decrease, hence what to debit and what to credit. So let's take this off and let's go back to clean. And let's go back to what we will find. As I said, assets. And in my double entry, if there's an increase in asset, it is going to be a debit entry. Any of my asset increases, it will be a debit entry. If there's a decrease in asset, it is going to be a credit entry. Decrease in asset is going to be a credit entry. Okay, so if my asset decreases, it will fall on this side. If my asset increases, it will fall on that side. Increase in asset, debit. Decrease in asset, credit. Okay, now let's go to liability. And liability is anything that I owe. And so if there's an increase in liability, it is going to be a credit. Increase in liability is going to be a credit entry. So if my liability increase, if I owe some more money than I owe yesterday, my liability is increasing, it's a credit entry. And if my liability decrease, a decrease in liability is going to be a debit entry. Liability increase is going to be credit entry. Liability decrease is going to be debit entries. Opposite of what is asset. Assets increase, debit. Asset decrease is going to be credit. Now, so that's asset and liability. We have other things that we have to deal with, such as expenses. Expenses will most times always increase. I am paying rent, I am paying wages, I am paying salaries, I am paying for motor vehicle upkeep, whatever it is I am paying for, my expense will always have a debit entry. Expenses entry will always be on the debit side, because if I am paying an expense, then more than likely I'm going to either get money from my cash account or from my bank account, which is an asset, and that asset will decrease, so my expense will increase. Of course, as I said before, capital is always on the credit side. There's purchases. Whenever we purchase goods, purchases will always be on the debit side, and sales will always be on the credit side. Now these are some of the accounts, some of the main accounts that we'll have to encounter as we go into our double entry system, and I just want us to remember that. Asset, if there's an increase, it's a debit. If there's a decrease, it's a credit. Liability, if there's an increase, it's a credit. If there's a decrease, it's a debit. All my expenses are going to be on my debit side. All my capital will be on my credit side. Whenever we do a purchases, there's going to be on the debit side, and if it's a sales, that's going to be on the credit side. Basic knowledge for your double entry system.